Do you realize that the two groups of people that we lose the most rapidly among evangelicals are young people between the ages of 18 and 22? We have a lot of groups working with them, and the older people over the age of 55. And practically nobody's working with them because they say, they're retired, they're not going to be very useful in the church. And so what we need to do is say, okay, how can we mobilize them to be more involved in the proclamation of the gospel?
Thank you for tuning in today to I Retire for Him. Your retirement years can be 30 years filled with meaning and purpose as long as you connect your faith and your retirement days. Welcome to I Retire for Him. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Please check us out online at iretire4him.com. iRetireForHim.com. When you were 25, were you contemplating how God would use you when you turned 65? When you turned 65, did you lay out a 25-year plan for how God would use you in retirement? At 89, did you know how God would be using you at 89? Do you have a 41-year plan like Moses did when he was, 79 years old? Or will you make it to 110 like Joshua? Well, we don't know the answers to all those questions, but we do know that when we retire, God's not done with this. Bill Wagner is just that kind of guy who's done all that kind of planning and asked all those kinds of questions. And at 84, he founded the Global Strategy Forum at Olivet University. And he currently chairs the Institute for Global Strategic Studies there as well. Let's catch up with Bill today as he runs through to his 90th birthday coming up real soon. Bill Wagner, welcome to I Retire for Him.
Thank you, Jim. Looking forward to it.
So, Bill, most people in the church today believe that the American dream of retirement is biblical. How did you figure out that it was all a lie? That retiring and going on a 30-year vacation was just a strategy to steal, kill, and destroy?
Well, I've always been convinced that you've got all these retired people and they're not doing a whole lot. And when I was in Albuquerque, I remember I had some older people in my church, and they were in another church, and they felt totally useless. They said they like to have them come to the church because they give a lot of money, but they do absolutely nothing in the church. And I just said, when I get to that age of retirement, I'm going to start finding ways to use these people because they've got tremendous experience, tremendous intelligence, a readiness to serve the Lord. And so that's where I started working on this whole idea.
So, let's take a step back a few decades. How had God prepared you over those first 65 years of your life for the work that you're doing now?
Well, Jim, I've had a fascinating life. I really have. In fact, I even wrote a book. The title of the book was From Classroom Dummy to University President. You see, I have dyslexia, and I've had dyslexia all of my life, and I barely made it through grade school without having to repeat the classes. I was in the bottom 10% of my high school graduating course, and I went in and got a degree in engineering. And one reason why I did was because I was good with numbers, and also my father was the head of the engineering department at the University of New Mexico, so I became an engineer. And I did get my degree in engineering, and then the next thing I knew, I went to seminary and got a degree in seminary, then I got another master's degree in seminary, and I got 2 doctor's degrees, and just kept going. But I have actually written more books than I have read in my entire life. I just do not read, period. And so what it is I feel like God has been preparing me. He's made me very, very practical and given me a lot of opportunities to be a practical individual. So I've really appreciated that. But one thing that happened when I was very young, when I was about 21, 22, and I was doing evangelism work as a youth evangelist, I said, what am I going to do when I get old? And I said, well, when I get old, I'll just be an evangelist among the older people. I'll be an evangelist among anybody that I'm working with. I had a life insurance agent one time that said, the effective area of your ministry will be with those people that are 10 years younger and 10 years older. That is the area. And so as I've gotten older, I have changed the people that I'm working with, and now I'm working with people that are somewhere between 80 and 100.
Wow. I love that attitude and the fact that you were thinking even as a young guy, hey, my life's really not going to change when I get older. I'm just going to have a different audience. But the audience kind of moves with you, because I've seen that in my own stuff. But it is still, you still have to have peers, people that you hang out with that are still looking at your attitude going, Bill, I don't understand. Why aren't you just going on vacation? How do you explain to your peers about your attitude for how you're spending your retirement years and how that's more of a biblical attitude than what they've been adopting? Because a lot of them, sold their houses and moved to Florida or Arizona and went on vacation for 30 years. How do you explain, what are these conversations like for you and your peers?
Well, actually, I've just always been active. I have just never stopped, and the conversation very seldom comes up. People don't ask me about it. They just kind of accept who I am and what I'm doing, and then I always turn the conversation back to them and say, "What are you doing for the Lord?" And I've been amazed that sometimes I can encourage them to be more involved with the Lord.
Drive change with your change by using Project World Impact's Swipe feature, a tool that puts spare change to amazing use.
To get started, visit Project World Impact's website or download the PWI Swipe app and create a free account.
We invite you to choose I Work for Him as your nonprofit of choice. This partnership will ensure that more workplace believers discover that their workplace is their mission field.
Then you'll just enter your card details to link a credit or debit card. You can even link more than one if you prefer.
Just set it and forget it, and still impact workplaces and believers all around the world.
At the end of the month, the spare change from each purchase you make will be calculated and donated to I Work for Him.
It's that easy. No hidden fees, no extra work to do.
You've learned to partner with God in your work. Let's help more people come to that life-changing realization.
Sign up for Project World Impact Swipe today. Yeah, that purpose thing is, what my wife and I lived in Florida for 20 years. So we lived around a lot of retirees who were really struggling to find meaning and purpose. You're in the Dallas area where there's a lot of retirees in Texas, all over Texas. Do you ever have a chance when you're having those conversations with them, when you ask them, hey, what are you doing for the Lord? Do they ever say, well, I'm retired, I can't do anything? I mean, do you ever get pushback by when they're saying, because a lot of them have been told by their local church that they don't have anything for them to do?
No, I don't give them the chance to do that. They don't tell me that. One of the things I've been doing lately, Jim, and I was in California, and I noticed all these older people in the church, and they were not being used. And so I started a senior-led old-fashioned revival in my church in California. It was very successful. And then I came to Texas, and I started one in one church, and that was successful. And I have another one coming up in my church now. And what it is I get all of the senior citizens that are in the church, and they're in charge of all the committees, and they're in charge of going to the senior citizens' homes and the assisted living homes and getting them to come, everything like that. And I'm putting these people to work, doing the work they used to do, because all of these people grew up in a time when they used to have revivals in the spring and the fall in the churches, and they used to have testimonies and everything. And the type of music they had was this old-fashioned hymns. And so we're doing exactly that now, and they have really enjoyed it, and they've appreciated it, and they've enjoyed being used for the Lord.
So the books that you've written, have you written specific books on retirement?
No, none whatsoever.
Well, I have, and so maybe I wrote it alongside my 89-year-old father-in-law, and we'd like to invite everybody to go out and check out getting a copy of I Retire for Him. Maybe you want to give it to them for helping them start off their new year as they contemplate retirement this year. Get a copy of I Retire for Him for your friends. You could choose audio, digital, or paper copies, as well as a PDF format. Go to iworkforhim.com/bookstore for all of the different details. I Retire for Him is a book that I wrote alongside my 89-year-old father-in-law, who wrote about the stories of how he was living out of the faith in his retirement. Get a copy of I Retire for Him and start changing the lives of those who are contemplating retirement all around you. All right, Bill, so let's talk about the Institute for Global Strategic Studies. What's its mission?
Okay, what I did is I've always been, I'm a missiologist, Jim. I'm not a theologian, I'm a missiologist. I'm an international missiologist. Both of my doctor's degrees are in missions. And so I was saying, why is it that some groups are growing and some are not? So I studied 7 groups, and they were the Jehovah Witnesses, the Southern Baptists, the Assemblies of God, the Mormons, the Muslims, the homosexuals, and what I call the cover organizations, the World Council of Churches, the World Evangelical Association, and the Sun Movement. Why are these groups growing? And what I discovered when I studied Islam, and by the way, I've written a book on Islam, how Islam plans to change the world. But I found out that the Muslim missiologists divide their strategy into 3 levels. They call it a micro, a meta, and a macro level. Now, for us, micro would be personal evangelism and church planting. That's we do that. We do a good job as evangelicals at that level. The meta would be where we create unions and conventions and associations and universities and seminaries. This is where you're working at a larger level. And we do a good job at that level. But the macro is where you are changing the society and where you are planning to change the society. And there's only 3 groups that actually work at the mega level of the 7 I studied. They are the Mormons, the Muslims, and the homosexuals. And they have been very successful. So I said, why don't we as evangelicals call together mega thinkers? You are a mega thinker. You don't think in terms of just saying, well, I'm going to go out to my local church and win a couple people to the Lord. You're saying, how do I reach the whole retired community? This is thinking at a mega level. And sometimes mega thinkers are put off on the side. They're not really appreciated as such. So I'm bringing all these people together, and I've brought together about 120 from 26 different countries. And we have these meetings where we just sit down and say, what can we do? Let me give you one very brief, quick idea. I don't want to preach here, but the homosexuals, up until 1990, they did not have a strategy in place. And then in 1990, 2 homosexual professors from Harvard University wrote a book entitled After the Ball. And they said, we are going to change the American perception of homosexualities, and we're going to change the society. And so they wrote all their strategy down on this book. If you want to find out how they changed it, here it is. They tell us what to do. The only problem is if you want to buy that used book now, it runs you about $400. They don't want people to see it. So, but one of the things they did, they said, where is there money and influence in the American society? It is in the corporations.
Right.
How do we influence the corporations? You don't go to the CEOs because the CEOs at that time were not sympathetic to what they were advocating. And so they said, we will study the board of directors of all of the major corporations until we find one homosexual or one person sympathetic to our cause on the board of directors. We will create a beachhead until we influence another board member, another board member, another board member, until we take over the board. Then we can use that corporation for our agenda. They took over Disney, they took over Ford, they took over General Motors, they took over many of the major corporations in America that began to advocate for their cause. And this is what I'm saying, why don't we as evangelicals think a little bit differently so that we might be able to do some greater work for the Lord?
Because people have been told, I believe the answer to that question is people have been told, hey, business is evil, and it's a necessary evil, and that stay out of government, stay out of politics, when in fact all of those missiologies that you've described, the Muslims, the Mormons, the Jehovah Witnesses, the LGBTQI plus community, and you said one other one, they all understand. You got to get all the way to the top. You got to influence from the top down. You got to be able to control policy. And that's what's amazing. So how does this apply to the 40 million retired believers in this country right now? How do you activate them? Because just imagine if every one of them knew that their work and now their retired years mattered, that they could change the world. I mean, we do have a president that is 80 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, I must admit, Jim, that that's why I'm here with you now. I have not given a lot of thought as to how the older generation can be involved in the mega missions, that's your job. Now, we'll have to have more contact on that and find out how we can do that. But I think there are ways that we can do it. But as to how we're going to do it, I'm not sure. Right now, my senior-led old-fashioned revivals is working just simply at the micro level,
Sure.
where we're bringing just these individuals. Maybe we could develop some type of a system whereby we could have these type of revivals all over the United States to use senior citizens and to get them involved once again, because there's a large number of senior citizens that are going to go into eternity without Jesus Christ. Do you realize that the two groups of people that we lose the most rapidly among evangelicals are young people between the ages of 18 and 22? We have a lot of groups working with them, and the older people over the age of 55. And practically nobody's working with them because they say, they're retired, they're not going to be very useful in the church. And so what we need to do is say, okay, how can we mobilize them to be more involved in the proclamation of the gospel? Let's do it.
Well, and I think it goes beyond just the proclamation of the gospel to the living out of the gospel, because it's the kingdom part that a lot of retired believers have never been taught, that they can bring the kingdom to earth, and then when they're retired, they're actually fully funded missionaries. They could go wherever they need to go. They don't need to worry about making a paycheck. And what's amazing, Bill, is that there's so much wisdom in the people 55 plus. I like to go 65 plus. If you look at the wisdom that's capped in those generations, what a shame it is that stuff's not being passed on to the next generations. I know you made a comment as we're connecting up for this. Like, technology is not your best friend, but technology allows us to impact more people today than ever before. I mean, I have conversations all the time with people in other countries because of technology, and to be able to share that stuff. So how do you see any of your peers, people 70 to 90, pouring their lives into that tech-savvy generation of the Gen Zers and the millennials? Do you see anybody being intentional about pouring their life into them?
Well, one thing I didn't mention, I'm going to take a step back. On the Global Strategy Forum, I determined that there were 12 cultural building stones for any culture. And so we divided the culture into 12 what we called mountains. They were art and theater, technology, government, sports, music, politics. We've got 12 of these, and one of them is technology. And so we have one person that is very sharp in the area of technology. And so we will have to get together with that person and say, start thinking about the older generation. How can you do that with technology with the older generation? And this person knows technology. And so all we can do is inspire them to move further in that area. So to come together and to share and to challenge will be our next task.
Mm. And speaking of technology challenges, Bill, a lot of us are having problems with our computers because there's constantly enemies trying to get into our computers. That's why we partner with SaferNet. You're seeing on my TV behind me. SaferNet.com is a company that's a kingdom company that absolutely wants to make our computer time productively delivered. They take care of web filters and antivirus, and they take care of getting us out there on the internet with a VPN so people can't see where we're going and what we're doing. SaferNet's a great partner with I Retire for Him. We invite everybody listening to check out SaferNet online, SaferNet.com. That's SaferNet.com. Bill, can you imagine a time where the church wakes up to this huge idea that they've got all this biblical wisdom and all this spiritual maturity on the sidelines? And can you imagine a time when we can get those people off the grandstands and back into the game? What would our country be like if retired believers could be mobilized again?
I think it's a tremendous task. And Jim, I am thrilled to death that the Lord has called you to do that. I'm greatly impressed with you. And you will be invited to our next conference for the Global Strategy Forum to represent the older generation. Now, how that's going to be done, I'm not overly optimistic, because in most churches, the older generation is not appreciated. And I'm not entirely sure how we can do that. Uh, when I started these senior-led old-fashioned revivals, the seniors were very excited about it. The younger generation were kind of accepting of it. Says, "Well, we've got to let the old people have something, you know." So how you change this, I'm not entirely sure, but we need to work on it and find out what we can do.
Well, I think we need to change it by just doing it. I mean, it's the deal is that when you look at the spiritual maturity, how many years have you been a believer, Bill?
I've been a ordained minister for 81 years.
Okay, 81 years. So you started following Jesus as a 9-year-old.
Well, no, I started following Jesus as an 18-year-old, and I was ordained as a 19-year-old.
Okay, all right. So we had little math problems. So that'd be 71 years, not 81 years, because you're not 99. So
Yeah, 71. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's why I went to 9 instead of 19. All right. So you've been following Jesus since you were 19 years old. Imagine what you have learned about following our Lord in those 71 years. And then you multiply that by 40 million retired believers who have been following Jesus from 1 to 100 years or whatever it may be. When you unleash that wisdom, that spiritual knowledge on the next generations, they could learn. I mean, think how many mistakes could be avoided if people would just start listening to people that are chronologically superior to them. Do you have any of your friends, that people that you hang out with, that are looking for ways to put that wisdom, that spiritual discernment into action? Besides you, I mean, you've got your peers, but do you have other people that you hang out with that are like, hey, I've got something to offer here?
Not really, Jim. The challenge has not gone out really for this group of people with this. I think that's one of the major things we're going to have to do. One of the foundational stones we're going to have to build to begin to challenge them to say, what can you do now? I have my Sunday school teacher that says, I'm retired now. He retired 2 days ago. And he says, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And I thought, you don't know what you're going to do with yourself. You are a wise Christian leader. You can do so much. And so I have to talk to him on a private basis and encourage him.
Yeah. Get him a copy of I Retire for Him and get him on the phone with me. Let's get this guy going. Let's kick him in the rear and go, hey, because Bill, that's the issue. So many people know what they're retiring from, but almost nobody knows what they're retiring to. So, Bill, you've spent the last 25 years of your retirement being active and vibrant in the kingdom of God, doing things all over the country. Do you have some words of encouragement for those listening today that are going, hey, I want to be like Bill. I want to be at 90 running really hard?
Well, one of the things that I've done, Jim, is 2 things, and I'll kind of talk about both of these. One of them is I studied Joshua and Moses, and both of these guys were 80 years old when they began their ministries. 80 years old, and they both worked until they were 120, and so they had 40 years there of very good work at this particular point. And so I've always felt like I've got 30 more years to go before I can pass on, because I want to be like Moses and Joshua. And these guys started at that age. And so I think that many of our older people can start at this age. But one of the things that I tell my people is this, my older ones is this, is that if I wanted to really be the person I think that God wants me to be, I would say I need to pattern my life after somebody. And so what I did is I said, I want to pattern my life after somebody. Who do I want to pattern it after? I want to pattern it after Jesus. And so I thought, in Jesus, we know about his birth. We know about his ministry from 30 to 33, but we know practically nothing about his growing up until the age of 30, except we've got one Bible verse in the book of Luke where he says, and Jesus grew in stature and wisdom and favor with God and man. And these were 4 areas. And so I have used these 4 areas in my life, and every 2 months I come back and evaluate my life and say, how am I doing in these 4 areas? And I use these with older people too. I say, even though you are old, you need to be active in all 4 of these areas. And they are wisdom, academic. You need to continue to learn and to grow. I don't read books, but I still learn a lot from a lot of different areas. You need to be very active academically. Stature, you need to run. I won't want to brag, but I've run about 3 times around the world now. And about 2 years ago, they had a West Coast Masters track meet out in California where they had all these masters. And so I ran in my age group, and we could only enter 5 events. And so I walked away with 4 golds and 1 silver at the age of 88. So, and I keep my body in good shape, and therefore it's still going. So you've got to have academic and physical and social. Social is so important. Favor with man. And I tell these older people, that's why we have church. That's why we have our Sunday school or our life groups, so that we can have this relationship. And that's why you need to go out to the senior citizens' homes and to visit older people, so you can build a personal relationship with other people. Too many of our older citizens become couch potatoes and they sit at home. They have to be active socially. And then the 4th one is favor with God spiritually. They have to continue to grow spiritually. And some of our older people have been very great spiritual giants in the past, but they've kind of let the spiritual life go. There's been no more growth in that area. So I say for our older people, be involved in all 4 of those areas if you want to be like the Lord.
Wow. Bill, there's so much we can cover today, but we have covered a lot, and I'm grateful. And maybe this has got to be maybe we'll have a future conversation about how do we work this together to motivate and mobilize, because there's so many. We're talking millions of retired believers all over the country, and that's not including all the people that are quote unquote retirement age around the globe. But Bill Wagner, thank you so much for being on I Retire for Him today. Thanks for sharing a little of your story. Thanks for those words of encouragement for our listeners. I was grateful to spend some time with you today. I'm going to close out the show, and hang on, because I'd like to talk to you after we're done recording. You've been listening to I Retire for Him with your host, Jim Brangenberg. In this retirement phase of life, we all want our lives to be full of meaning and purpose. So in the end, we can say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. I Retire for Him is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Join this movement of God so you can say, I retire for Him.